Hello and welcome to the Sexient Being Sessions. I am Alix Pruett, a certified sex, love, and relationship coach and reality guide. I work with men, women, and couples plus who want to move out of their old toxic patterns, traumas, and beliefs to create relationships from a place of deep connection, pleasure, and fulfillment, whether with themselves or others. Today I'm joined by Rachelrose. You want to go ahead and introduce yourself, Rachelrose?
I am Rachelrose. I am a psychologist and a life coach, and I help women reestablish a sense of self after trauma or narcissistic abuse or domestic abuse of any kind. Yeah,
Beautiful.
thank
So, our
you.
topic today, which you
Mhm.
chose, is
I did.
intellectualizing healing.
Yes.
And so, what does that look like to you?
So this came up for me in a video I made last week. I think I posted it yesterday in where a lot of people who have been through trauma of any form end up falling into this hole at some point in their healing process where the pursuit of knowledge and understanding of what's happening to them, what happened in the experience, the other, understanding where the other person was coming from,
Mhm.
and it is in the initial phases of healing. But after a certain point, you kind of fall into a hole or a safety net in a way where you are using the books and the videos and all of that to rationalize or uh, like keep you in a certain stasis
Mhm.
in your healing in that moment, that you don't end up processing anything like somatically in your body or mind, and
Yeah.
you're just like, oh, I learned that narcissistics hoover, so I'm going to spend a whole next week doing research on narcissistic hoovering, and you're not actually processing how it feels genuinely for yourself to be hoovered by a narcissist.
Yeah, and I
And
think
so,
that
yeah.
idea of the somatic part of it,
Mhm.
right,
Mhm.
is really actually allowing yourself to get out of that thinking mind and
Mhm.
to bring the presence to your sensations, to your
Yeah.
emotions, to your feeling
Yeah.
body.
Yeah. There's a lot of healing, especially from trauma. Um, is you need to do body programming, which is somatic healing,
Mhm.
because you got to reprogram your body basically, um, to be able to process the new identity that is you now after all of that experience.
Yeah. Yeah, that's I think when I mean, I've ended up having conversations randomly come up throughout the week as it keeps seeming to happen that end up touching back to whatever our broader topic will end up being.
Mm-hmm.
And what I kept coming across was in conversations, being like, yeah, like I've gone through therapy and I've gone through counseling, and I know that that model is starting to shift and change to involve more somatics or to involve breath work and the body and movement. Um, but for a really long time, it was mainly based on talk therapy, which is all very heady space. And
Yeah.
that space of talk therapy is more of this top-down model to where, like, if you imagine, like, that space of your mind or brain and the thinking rational part being kind of like this control room, right? That's then trying to touch into the emotions, touch into the primal body, right? Those instinctual urges or desires. It doesn't really work because we're just trying to assert control over
Mm-hmm.
them.
Yeah.
When you get into somatics and breath works and a lot of like body mapping and aspecting processes, you're ending up working with more of this bottom up approach
Mm-hmm.
where you're allowing the space for more of that like primal system or the emotional body to bring up the sensations, to bring up the feelings, and then creating this path of greater integration because you're not trying to control any of it. You're creating a
Yeah.
safe space for it to be expressed and witnessed, heard, seen, and even loved,
Yes. And I think
right?
that's a great way to explain it. And what happens is people don't have that safe space that you just explained,
Yeah.
and they don't want to lose control. And that is
Mhm.
what intellectualizing healing really is you get to control your healing. And it's
Yeah.
much easier to control the intellectualization of your healing, the mind part of it, versus the body, which is
Yeah.
the somatics. And so, like you said, having a safe space will allow you to, I guess, relinquish control in a sense so that you can go about this and not fall into that trap.
Yeah. And that's there is so many narratives, not only that tell us like, oh, like emotions aren't safe to be with, right? That cause that
Mm-hmm.
space of rejection of anger and sadness and jealousy, or even happy emotions. Like there is rejection of feeling love. There all it can come up in respect to any emotion. It's just there's certain subsets that societally have been deemed more negative or more positive as far as feelings. But with that, it's there's
Well,
also
yeah.
that like primal body and
Mm-hmm.
those that natural fight or flight or fight, flight, freeze, fawn, right?
Yeah.
That we can end up also feeling isn't safe or getting that narrative. And so we can't tap into it at all.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like when people, let's see, what was a good personal example? I actually just had a conversation with a guy who was talking about like, oh, he doesn't allow himself to even like touch his primal because he starts to black out. Right.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
One of the few instances, and it was that very high like fight drive. It was an argument I got into, and I actually started getting tunnel vision to where I could see the outside like peripherals of my vision narrowing down and like getting dark on the outsides and coming down to this hyper focus point in the center of that target, which
Mm-hmm.
is a very natural primal state that like came up in hunting, came up in survival, and is there like evolutionarily to keep us safe. I remember when that happened, it scared me immediately, and I was like, "What the hell is this?" And I, like, looked at the person I was in the argument with, and I stopped, and I was like, "I need to, like, walk away right now, because if not, I was gonna punch them," and I was terrified of what was gonna happen if I punched them.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, thankfully, there was that cognitive association to be like, "You need to walk away right now, or something's going to happen,"
Yeah.
like, that you don't want to go into.
Yeah.
But there can be so much repression around that primal state that then
Yes.
it becomes very dysregulated in the system. You go into a full blackout and you don't even know what happened.
Yeah.
And there's no drugs or alcohol or anything else involved.
Mm-mm. Yeah. It's a perfect example of like the negative effects that can happen to intellectualizing your healing and not knowing it and not
Hmm.
somaticizing and processing your healing is exactly what you said, and it's a great emotional regulation on your part to have seen it before you reacted.
Hmm.
That so many of us would have just punched and not
Yeah.
known why we couldn't hold back. It was like there's a lot of control in the intellectualization, as I said before,
Yeah.
and having the ability to fall into a safe space behind a book is very tempting,
Hmm.
but you don't you well, I shouldn't be so blunt about it. It can very well lead to situations where you end up swinging and throwing hands because you haven't processed anything in your body, and that can feel very overwhelming, and that can also be panic attack, shaking, crying,
Hmm.
It could even be physical, like especially for women, kidney infections or bladder infections, um, vomiting.
Yeah.
All of that can be a result of not processing your healing and then just intellectualizing it. So you cognitively, like you were mentioning before, cognitively, there was something there,
Hmm.
but there was no control over it physically.
Yeah. Yeah. That's if I had stayed in that space for seconds longer, right? And had not consciously made the choice, I need to
Yeah.
walk away right now,
Hmm.
I would have ended up throwing a punch. And I
Yeah.
definitely did not want to do that into that relationship in that situation. Like there are certain actions that you can take in relationships that like that relationship will never be the same,
Hmm.
right? And that can be for the better or worse depending on how you're perceiving that, but like that would have created damage and levels of repair in that relationship that I didn't want to have to go through. So thankfully that piece stepped in to like, no, let's move away from this. Like even if that person had gotten angry that I walked away, like that was okay. They could have gotten angry, right? Like I was doing what I needed
Hmm.
to in that moment, not only to protect myself, but to protect them.
Yeah. And I would say me today
Hmm.
would react way better than me like 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And that is because I figured these things out over time by making mistakes.
Hmm.
And I want to point that out to anyone who is listening who might be beating themselves up because they see themselves in the situation that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Like, it's okay. Like, if you agree that you might be intellectualizing your healing right now, now you know, and that's
Well,
a
and
step in
that,
the right direction.
yes, definitely. And that's, I do want to say, so that example I gave was very specifically of a fight response.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
there's been other times in my life where I've had freeze responses in my system,
Yeah.
and I ended up carrying a lot of shame and being like, well, why didn't I do anything? There was also a part of me that like felt like, no, that was the perfect choice to make and to like listen to whatever that guidance was for my system, because if you had done anything else, like it could have been more catastrophic.
Yeah.
Right, like there was actually an instance, and I remember it very vividly. I was in the '94 earthquake that happened down in Southern California, and this thing happened during the middle of the night. I was a little kid asleep in bed, and I remember like briefly waking up, looking over and hearing my mom scream at me from the hallway that I needed to get out of bed and to get where she was. And something in my system told me, no, like curl up against the wall. And I fell back asleep. I still have pictures in my mind of the dream I was having, which was bulldozers pushing on all the sides of my apartment building we were living in.
Mhm.
And I still remember her in the background yelling. There's also like this visual image of seeing an armoire that was across from my bed at one point, standing there where it normally was. And then when the shaking finally stopped, rolling over. And if I had been sleeping where I normally slept, I hadn't curled up against the wall, which I never did normally. Um, the armoire would have fallen on me, right?
Mhm.
And years later, I was talking to my mom about it because I remember an iron falling out of a cabinet in the hallway where she was standing and almost hitting her. And like all these different pieces, but I was talking to her, I was like, okay, if I had actually come over to where you were versus staying exactly where I was, like, is it more likely that I would have gotten hurt? And she's like, oh, yeah. She's like, that iron fell out of the cabinet. There was a huge mirror that was in the bathroom, which was also connected to the hallway. That glass from the mirror exploded out into the hallway. And then she
Wow.
had a bookshelf in her room, and the books literally flew off the bookshelf across her room out into the hallway. And so it was interesting because I didn't have any injuries, right, physically from that. I don't
Yeah.
even think I particularly carried a whole lot of trauma, But I remember there being a part of me that felt guilty that, like, I didn't listen to my mom, right? That I listened to whatever this other thing was that told me to, hey, curl up against the wall and just go back to sleep.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it was the thing that probably kept me the most safe. And that to me was more of that freeze response. The freeze response being that lack of action, right? And
Yeah.
even
Yeah.
your system like going into a sleep or like it I mean, you think of a possum, they look dead, right?
Yes. Yeah.
They're very, very slowly breathing and their internal systems are working, but they respectively look dead.
Yeah. I think I've touched on the freeze possum analogy a bit in some of my videos if anyone
Mhm,
wants to look through my stuff. Um, and that it is either hit or miss. So like in this situation that you're explaining, it was a hit. Like that freeze
mhm,
response was what was necessary, and I'm glad that you trusted your instincts. And I think that's a really important one when dealing with fight, flight, freeze, or fawn.
mhm.
Is trust your instincts, because you yourself know best.
Yeah.
But with the possum, nature, like what the playing possum freeze response works fine in nature. It will save your life in nature. But if you remove yourself from nature and put yourself as a possum on a freeway,
Mhm.
that freeze response will actually get you killed.
Yeah.
So it like I said, trust your you use your intuition with yourself, trust your gut and your instincts. Which is why it's so important to have that body processing a part of your healing,
Mhm.
is so that you're not confusing your instincts or that gut feeling and then get hit by a semi.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah,
know
and
when is the right time to freeze and when is not, and what works for you and your healing processes.
yeah, I think the bigger piece of that story was there's gonna be times where you end up
Mhm.
taking an action, right?
Yeah.
You have no idea why you took that action, but
Yeah.
you could look back and see where it falls under this fight, flight, freeze, or fawn.
Hmm.
And like you can actually end up seeing where this thing was trying to protect you, where that instinctual
Yeah.
drive was saying this is the best choice. Um, when I used to study body language, one of the interesting little factoids I came across was talking about how the feet are the most honest part of the person's body,
The
right? Because,
feet.
yes, the
Oh.
feet, because they are the furthest away from the brain, right? People
Yeah.
learn how to lie with their facial expressions, but they
Yes.
rarely learn how to lie with their feet, nor do
This
they
is very
think
true.
about it,
Hmm.
right? Also, like in those studies, it ended up coming up that
Hmm.
the the feet. So, like, let's say you're walking across the street and a semi is all of a sudden barreling towards you without consciously thinking, your body will respond and like jump back to move
Yeah.
out of the way,
Yeah.
right? And that wasn't you saw it now you're thinking I need to jump, I need to do whatever action. Your body just reacts.
Hmm.
And in
Like
those
instinct.
yeah, in those instances that is that source of like the primal body
Yes.
response
Hmm.
and this system that is there specifically for your survival,
Yeah.
right? And to get like those desires and needs met for you to keep going.
Yeah.
And so to me it's more that like if you end up like making these choices or having these things happen, like is there things in it that could be dysregulated that you need to work with and integrate? Yes, right? But do you need to feel shame about that system?
Hmm.
No,
No.
not at all. It is
Hmm.
an amazing system that like so much of psychology doesn't even really understand.
Yeah. I want to just throw this in there just because you mentioned the shame, and we're both in agreement that like no, you shouldn't feel that, but it's also very very normal to
Hmm.
feel that like
Yeah.
without control, like that just pops in there because of how we're conditioned in society. So if you feel a little bit of shame and you're like catching yourself feeling that, that's totally normal.
Yes. Yeah,
Like
it is.
it is
It's
not
very
you shaming
normalized.
yourself to be like, oh, I'm feeling a little bit of shame right now. Like you're registering how you're feeling, and that's a
Yeah.
totally normal response.
Well, and it's just give it that place of notice. Like, oh, I'm feeling shame about this.
Exactly.
Well,
Hmm.
like you don't need to then compile it and send yourself in a shame spiral, right? You
Exactly.
get to
Yeah.
notice that you're feeling shame, and it's like, okay,
Hmm.
where did that
Beautiful.
shame come from? Because I can tell you, like, if you were a baby and you literally never experienced a drop of shame in your life, like you're not going to be embarrassed
Exactly.
or feel ashamed or guilty
Hmm.
or any of the other things. Those spaces of shame are very socially conditioned over time.
Yeah. Hmm. I love the way you put it. Is like figuring out where it comes from
Hmm.
instead of going down that spiral. That's a great like tidbit of how to stop yourself from spiraling.
Hmm.
I apologize. I'm eating. It is a great technique to help like get yourself out and take a little bit of control in the balance that is both intellectual healing and somatic healing.
Hmm.
Like that combines the two, and that's a really good way to like merge them if you are someone who is catching yourself intellectualizing your healing a lot.
Yeah.
This is a really good way to like merge that so that you can figure out a little bit of control around your somaticization and your healing and process that physically as well as mentally.
Yeah. I think there's, there ends up being those like sort of like thinking shame spirals, is how I'll put it,
Mhm. Mhm.
right? That get
Definitely.
brought into the healing process. And that's the the mind, that like thinking rational side is also a super valuable tool. I do think that the rational mind, at least I know it did in my healing process, can get a really bad rap on its
Yes.
own.
Definitely.
It's a
I know exactly what you
valuable
mean.
it's a valuable tool. It's just finding those spaces of nuance to where its value is, like the primal system, like the emotional body, right, can be difficult. And there's a certain training that happens through
Yeah.
those societal spaces that end up leading that more rational brain to being based in shaming and being based in berating and trying to control ourselves all the time,
Yeah.
right? Where I know, at least for me, one of my most valuable spaces of my thinking rational mind is it is really, really stinking good at seeing patterns,
Yeah. Mhm.
right? It loves puzzles. And so when I can shift that from this space of self shaming, self beratement, criticism, stuff like that, to curiosity, and that space of like, oh, I get to notice this. That's interesting, right? Rather
Mhm.
than I get to notice this, that's right or wrong. That's where the value point is. It's that space that can like bring words to the questions and bring that curiosity forward so you can find the value in the other pieces.
Mhm. It is really important to take things slow and to pay attention
Hmm.
with your healing. What doesn't really matter what type of healing you're doing in that moment, but to not feel rushed and to pay attention.
Yeah. I
And
think there's a lot
yeah.
of value in slowing down.
Yeah. Mhm.
And that's a lot of us want a quick fix. We
Mhm.
really do. Like that can be part of that allure to medications, right?
Yeah.
Even though they definitely aren't the cure most of the time.
No, and it
And
takes weeks for your body to adjust to the medication. So the
yeah,
first time you pop that pill in, it's not going to work for about 14 to 30 days.
yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
obviously depending on the type of med,
Oh, well,
right?
yeah, yes, of course.
Um,
If
but
you're
well,
taking
because
something that's instantaneous, then definitely.
yeah, yeah,
But
like there was one point,
most psych meds are
yeah, there was one point
low
I was
build.
taking lorazepam, right?
Oh
But
yeah,
I
that one's
only
real
took
fast.
it for a week, but that was all I needed it for. And
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
because
it serves its purpose. Yeah.
there was a big dysregulation like coming up in my system. And I was like, I have exams, I have all these other things I have to do. Like, I can't do this piece right now. Right.
Hmm.
And that was okay too. Like, but I made room for giving it notice and
Hmm.
stuff otherwise. And this was years before I even got into this line of work and these sort of personal studies. Um, but I think there's a lot of the time where medications end up being seen as the cure, where more often they're a great band-aid. They're a great piece to help facilitate the healing process, but they get relied on very heavily as the thing to fix it.
Yeah,
It's
I
kind of
think.
like the self-medication with alcohol we've talked about and stuff like that,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. It's I really enjoyed this. I was watching this video yesterday. I wish I remember who it was by. Um, but it was about coping mechanisms, like
Mhm,
you were just mentioning. Um, and how, there are different we've developed different coping mechanisms as individuals since children. So
yeah,
obviously we're as a child, our coping mechanism isn't alcohol. So it could be hand holding or like snuggling stuffies
mhm,
or binge watching television, and figuring out, looking back throughout your lifetime up until childhood to figure out what your childhood coping mechanisms were,
mhm,
plus when they started and what happened right before it, is a really good healing journey that you can you can do that somatically and intellectually, um, preferably with a guide, in a safe
mhm,
space. Um, because I tried that out last week when I was watching this video, did a quick scan in myself, and I started laughing because it is, the coping mechanisms that I developed as a child. You tell yourself, oh, I developed this coping mechanism because of this traumatic thing that happened.
mhm,
And I have this stuffed animal that I cuddle with, that I've always cuddled with since I was a kid. It's the same one. It's a dragon named Dinosaur because I couldn't tell the difference when I was little. And obviously, there could be other instances leading up to this, but my first memory of when I started cuddling my stuffy dinosaur when I was little was after my sister started taking half of my desserts when I was little.
yeah,
And that was so traumatizing to me that I built a coping mechanism of cuddling a stuffed animal. And I started laughing to myself because I was like, oh yeah, that was so traumatic. But as a child, that was.
yeah,
So it's funny what you'll find, that like you could think that your drinking coping mechanism is around abuse that you've suffered as a young adult or an adult, but it very well could be that you're just like me and your sister was taking half of your dessert every single night, and it was traumatizing, and now it's developed into a coping mechanism that just kind of like snowballed over the years.
well, and that was one of my big things in my journey is, like, so before I ever got into the realm of coaching, like, I kept studying trauma, which I
Mhm.
find
Mhm.
interesting, but I didn't necessarily identify as having traumas, right? Like, there was always somebody else who had it worse, some other situation in
Yeah.
the world that, like, nullified that my experience could have been, like, traumatic or had impact,
Yeah.
right? And as I got into coaching spaces, I
Mhm.
started realizing, oh wait, no, like trauma is subjective.
Yeah,
It's not the actual events of the experience.
exactly. Yeah,
It is how that was interpreted by the person's system.
exactly. So in my case, getting half of your dessert stolen every single day from your sibling
Hmm.
could have affected every single person listening differently than how it
Yeah.
affected me. And that was a huge betrayal for me, seeing as it was my
Hmm.
older sister and I looked up to her and idolized her,
Yeah.
to then have your idol and the person that you look up to and want to be exactly like I used to dress like her. I'd wait till in the morning to see what she was going to wear, and then I'd run to my room and put on something that looked exactly like it. She absolutely hated it. And to be fair, probably a lot of her retaliation of my obsession, for lack of a different word, could have been to eat my dessert. And that was her way of trying to tell me and communicate to me, stop copying me.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, if you want to be me, I get to have your things, is what I take
exactly,
away from that.
exactly. Yeah, something
Right.
like that. That was
On
brilliant.
that very like child mindset, though, like
Yeah, yeah.
bring it down to the simple things.
Yeah. So when you really like peel back the layers of what is like a harmless, what a seemingly harmless thing of, my sister eating my desserts, peeling it back and, viewing it, like, no, I idolized this person and there was a betrayal that happened, which was
Hmm.
theft of something that I valued a lot, which I love dessert. It's
Hmm.
delicious. Um, and then that also being that one reprieve you get at the end of the evening as a kid, you get your popsicle and then you get to go to bed. And that was robbed from me. So I can understand why I resorted to developing that coping mechanism and how that has like snowballed throughout my lifetime. And like it started as a simple theft of dessert. And then, in high school, it could have been, I didn't get, something similar. But what's coming up for me is like certain betrayals of people that you idolize or envied. So in friend
Yeah.
groups,
Well,
certain
and
certain
that's the
betrayals that
word
happened
that
there.
out
Yeah.
of theft, betrayal, and
Mhm.
whatever else you had said, betrayal is the one that
Yeah.
stands out as that word.
Yes.
Like in those
Exactly.
types of situations, it's kind of like
Yeah.
if you have, or you're just starting to talk about friends groups, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
you have somebody new come in. Now, the person who you were hanging out with all the time, who was your best friend, is spending more time with them.
Yes.
That can feel like a
That's a
betrayal,
perfect example. Yeah. And
right?
it's like as you age and mature, all of these betrayals mature with you.
Yeah.
So it's no longer just a theft of dessert. It's now a betrayal of friendship or a romantic partner or a family member.
Hmm.
And that coping mechanism also evolves with you. So I, as an adult right now, very well could still use every single, like, let's say, in my case, over the years, I have smoked, drank, and I still cuddle my dinosaur,
Hmm.
my dragon named Dinosaur. And all of those coping mechanisms very well could, I'm not saying this is the case for everyone, but in my case, all stem from betrayal and that betrayal. And I have
Yeah.
just matured with that trauma response and coping mechanism over time. So at some point in my maturity, cuddling Dinosaur was just not enough, and I needed something else to help me cope with that betrayal.
Yeah.
And so I find new things for me. And for me, they were drinking and cigarettes. It
Well,
could be it could be, binge watching television or binge eating, um, like there, but it all stems from basically your first one, and then it evolves and like it what's the term, branches out
mhm,
from that one root.
yeah.
And
Well,
I
that's
found it such laughable. Oh, So all of my unhealthy trauma responses are coping mechanisms are purely because my sister stole my dessert when I was a child.
Yeah.
And I just started laughing, and it was like, how simple is that? You never would have thunk it.
Oh, I lost what I was gonna say.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Oh, no. Oh, inner child work. So
Yes, yes.
that is where a lot of that type of healing work, right? A lot of healing work
Mhm.
in general, especially with our patterns, belief systems, narratives, it
Yeah.
comes back to the inner child, right? Because
Yeah.
a lot of those patterns were actually seeded, right? They
Yeah.
That seed was planted or that path was initially paved in very early childhood, even typically between the ages of 0 to 5.
Yeah.
And then there were instances, whether in big ways or small ways, that build upon that to
Mhm.
validate this narrative of how you're viewing the world, how you exist in it, how you stay safe in it.
Yes. Yeah.
And
Mhm.
in my experience, one of the things that continually ended up happening was, so it probably started, right, in a lot of my like, I'm not enough, like, I'm too much, whatever those inner
Mhm.
narratives are, with very small instances that planted that seed
Yes.
and then progressively led to bigger and bigger instances over time. And especially the more I would repress my feelings, my experiences being valid in, let's say, I had had the betrayal of dessert being stolen,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, but that now, like, now I'm validating that, like, my it was okay for my partner to cheat on me. I'm validating that it's okay for my partner to steal money out of my wallet,
Mhm.
right? Or to steal my credit card
Yeah.
down the line. And like, where to me now, I'm like, no, that's a red flag. Get the hell out of my life. Like, I don't need you
Yeah.
here. I've had that happen. I've had my partners take money without asking.
Mhm.
That was not shared finances,
No.
right? And
But
then
yeah.
I go to them, and it's not the end of the relationship. It's me getting pissed off and then lecturing them and trying to understand what's coming up for them. But I'm not even acknowledging what was coming up for me in that,
Yeah.
or why I
Why I
was
was
even
accepting of
continuing
that.
allowing that to
Yeah.
be okay.
Yeah. And I love that you brought up the word safe,
Hmm.
because a lot of the time, in order to stay safe, that is the rationalization. That is the accepting of those behaviors, is because it makes you feel more unsafe to leave the relationship with that
Hmm.
person. Um, and the same with the intellectualizing healing. It's safer to stay behind the book
Yeah.
versus to basically go out onto the battlefield and figure out where it hurts.
Yeah.
So it's like you're walking around the aftermath of a battle, and you're trying to figure out where on your body you've been stabbed, shot, or like maimed in some way.
Hmm.
And that's a lot scarier. So
Yeah.
it is understandable that in that safety we rationalize, even though, in the future down the line, when we do end up, leaving that person, if that's what we end up choosing to do, we always beat ourselves up, and that shame arises. Why did I stay with them? Like, I knew it was wrong. I knew while it was happening. Why did I lie to myself? And the truth is that you lied to yourself because it made you feel safe. And that feeling of safe is very important.
Yeah. Well, and I think the other thing this is like bringing up in my system right now is being like the victim mentality. So those shame cycles may not only be around your experience, they could
Yeah.
also be more of those cycles that fall into victim mentality, right? Which there
Yes.
is
Yeah.
nothing wrong with acknowledging where you have been a victim, because all of us have been a victim at certain points in
At
time.
certain
I
points.
was
Yeah.
really
100%.
good at denying my victim in my life. at the same time, if you're just sitting there blaming the other person,
Yeah.
right, and shaming them that they're such a piece of shit, they're just an asshole, all these things,
Yes. Yes.
that is not helpful either. And that's falling
Yeah.
into some of these same intellectualizing patterns,
Yes. Yeah.
which again are there to try to keep you safe. Like, it makes sense, like, that your ex-partner cheated on you multiple times, kept lying to you, all these things, that your system does not want you to go back to them, right?
Yes. Yeah. And on top
But
of that, your system allowed you to stay in it longer than maybe the you now would have
mhm.
liked. But
Yes,
that but
definitely.
that's not something, because there's the inverse of what you were saying about the shame game.
Mhm.
Like like the inverse of that would be, instead of like just blaming the outside forces, you're not blaming any outside forces, and you're only blaming yourself. You're only shaming
Yes.
yourself,
Yeah.
and both are, they're equally unhealthy. There's a balance to everything.
Mhm.
Um, and that balance comes from both not blaming the other people and not shaming yourself for whatever transpired during your relationship with this person,
Yeah.
and just letting it go. It is what it is, and not holding on to it. A lot easier said than done, though, my friends.
Yeah, I think one of the really valuable processes I ended up going through, right? Or we'll say journeys in helping
Mhm.
me get to a more balanced place within myself of getting away from those blaming and shaming cycles,
Yeah.
right? Was really learning and looking at where I was taking things so personally,
Mhm.
right? There can be a lot around taking things personally.
Yeah.
There even the very simple way that most people talk about their feelings. So let's say that's my partner and I are currently in a polyamorous relationship, right?
Mhm.
If I am feeling jealous in my body and I look at him and I'm like, well, you made me feel jealous. Well, realistically, he didn't make me feel anything.
Yeah.
I could have felt any array of emotions
Exactly. Yeah.
about that experience of him being with somebody else. But what was coming up for me was jealousy. So the the nuance there is when this action happened, when you were flirting with this other girl or met with this other partner, right?
Yeah.
I felt jealous or
Yeah.
I felt insecure.
Mhm.
It's taking back ownership of what's coming up in your body, right? And
Mhm.
also acknowledging that in other people. Like, if somebody has now gone into a full flare where they're sobbing or angry and raging, whatever it is,
Yeah.
those are their emotions. They also could have felt any array of emotions about a situation. There's
Mhm.
something probably stemming from their past, their own narratives, beliefs, and patterns that is bringing up that emotion for them,
Yeah.
right? And to me, that space helped it take a step back to be a little bit less personal. That's even helped me in parenting,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like, my son's going into a full-on tantrum. Like, it can be really easy when another person's in a rage to then start feeling like we need to defend ourselves or
Yes.
protect ourselves. And so we go into those fight, flight, freeze, fawn cycles
Mhm. Yeah.
versus just being able to witness them in whatever experience they're having.
Yes. Which
And
I also want to point out, like,
yeah.
whatever response, like if you're, like having a tantrum like a, a 5-year-old, that's cool.
Mhm.
Whatever happens and you allow to happen in that moment, that's okay. And the point that I want to make with that is, if you're having an emotional and physical reaction that, in a sense, moves you to, quote unquote, irrational behaviors, crying, yelling, or whatnot.
Mhm.
And one of the things that you can say to yourself, once it's passed, which, allow it to happen, allow it to do its thing, and that's okay. Um, but something that I say to myself to like not fall into that shame game is, if it didn't matter and I didn't still care,
Mhm.
I wouldn't have reacted that way.
Yeah.
And so I can always bring myself back and regulate myself by noticing that there's hope within me, and that's why I reacted that way. And there's nothing wrong with having hope.
Yeah.
That's a great thing to have. I have hope that things will be good in my life. And so right now I'm upset because that hope has been questioned, and I'm angry, or I'm hurting, or I'm crying, or whatever. But having that feeling, having a reaction, doesn't really matter if it was like the greatest reaction or the bad, worst reaction. It doesn't matter. But having a reaction, telling yourself, oh, look at me. I still have like emotions and I care. And that's a good thing to tell yourself afterwards before falling down that shame spiral.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think one of the important things too, so like the story I told earlier about noticing the tunnel vision and like that I wanted to punch this person, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like obviously in that moment, I did not want to allow that punch to actually move in my system and
Yes.
impact that person.
Yes.
Um, One really valuable thing you can do, especially if you're noticing anger come up, is go to a safe space. So like if you are in your home, go into your bedroom, and if you
Yeah.
have a lock on the door, you can lock the door, but allow yourself to, like, kick and punch
Mm-hmm.
and scream and guttural growl, whatever it
Hell
is, like,
yeah.
into
They
pillows or blankets.
They
So
also
you're
have things called Rage Room now, guys. So if you
yes.
want to just pay, like, I think it's like $50, you can go take a bat and just beat the shit out of shit.
Well, and that this is more like if you're in that moment,
Oh no, I know. I was just
right?
throwing that in there.
Yeah, rage rooms are amazing, and, like, I mean, I've done bat practices where it's literally like I
Mhm.
gather things that weirdly ended up having symbolic meaning that, like,
Mhm.
evolved out as I worked with my coach, and I smashed the shit out of them with a bat, and it was so very, healing, and just that release of energy. I actually ended up breaking the baseball bat, which I was sad about, but also, like, very gratified in at the same
Yeah.
time.
Mhm. And
Speaking of, we should go to a rage room sometime. There's one in Vancouver.
oh, I love that idea. I am so down, and I'm going to dress up in whatever outfit. Maybe I'll be a unicorn.
Yes.
That would be brilliant. That is also, just since we're on the topic, going to a rage room would classify as processing your healing and not
Yes.
intellectualizing it. So there is no logic whatsoever to that process. You're just in your emotions and getting it out.
Yep.
And so that is a healthy control form, or I guess controlled form of having a semblance of control to
Well,
process
and
your
I
healing.
one of the important things to me is you're creating spaces of safety
Mm-hmm.
to connect with those emotions, with
Yeah.
those primal drives,
Yeah.
right? And so that's where, like, if you're at home and you get really flared and really angry, like, don't push it down and then start shaming yourself that, like, you shouldn't be feeling this thing, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Go into your bedroom. If you notice that in the moment, lock the door if you need to help
Mm-hmm.
create that defined safe space,
Yeah.
and wail on some pillows and blankets. And, like,
Yeah.
particularly men, when I've talked to them about this, they're like, "Well, I wanna, like, feel that I had like impact on something. So I punch a wall. My
Yeah.
brain goes, please don't hurt yourself in the process.
Yeah.
Like, I get you want to break something. In that instance, go to a rage room, build a rage room in your own garage,
That's brilliant.
if
Yes. Do
that's
that.
helpful, right? Get a punching bag so that you have
Mhm.
something you're hitting that has weight behind it.
Mhm.
But there's so much value in actually allowing that energy to move and so much profound wisdom that comes
Mhm.
with that.
I also want to advise the same feeling and another like instead of a rage room, um, self pleasure is also another release
Mhm.
that I think people don't really think about. Like when you're in a very feeling emotional state, we're adults. A
Yeah.
lot of things that we're repressing or angry or frustrated about is sexual. Like I'm upset because I'm fighting with my partner right now. If beating up a pillow is not working for you,
Mhm.
try beating up your pussy. Or for men, jerk it off. Like
So,
if
and
if the rage room isn't working for you, try the bondage room
yeah.
or the red room. You know what I mean? Um, and figure, I guess what I'm trying to say is explore the different avenues that come with that, and they're they both have the same amount of healing benefits.
Yeah, there's a lot of healing spaces that can come around with bringing
Pleasure play, yeah.
sexual play, pleasure practices and stuff
Hmm.
into those dynamics. Like, I do want to clarify, like, there's there are practices, and I am happy to help guide those
Good.
spaces, um, where it is very specifically getting into pleasure with uncomfortable emotions, right?
Yeah.
Like, you can have not only orgasms in life, you can have anger-gasms, you can have
Hmm.
rage-gasms, you can have
Exactly.
cry-gasms. Like, any of the feelings you have can become pleasurable.
Hmm.
It's bringing in this shift to how you exist with them,
Yes. Beautiful.
and that a level of integration through the system
Exactly.
to and it when you end up integrating those spaces, it also brings a lot of balance to where, like, you may have unconsciously been behaving in very toxic ways, not only to yourself, but to relationships around you and
Yeah.
situations around you, and not realized it because there is that repression, that shadowy side
Hmm.
to how you're interacting and the things you're denying within yourself. And when you create that space of integration, like, it gives the room for you to feel these things, for you to be present with them,
Hmm. And then
but
to process them. Hmm.
and to process them, but to also be able to make a conscious choice. Like, you're kind of bringing them in
Hmm.
as advisors to your life. But then there's that idea of the self, the higher self, God, like the universe, your highest wisdom, whatever that may be for you.
Yeah.
And you're allowing that to be the thing, like, in the lead. Like, I love the world of BDSM and like kink play, and I bring a lot of that into my work as far as philosophy and creating understandings around
Hmm.
spirituality and boundaries and being able to play with your edge,
Hmm.
right? With life. But in that, one of the things I came to a few years ago was like, before like I can really be like a great submissive because I identify as a submissive sexually, I
Hmm.
need to be able to be my own best dom, right?
Oh,
I
I love
need to
that.
be
Yeah.
able to push my own edges
Mhm.
right? I need to know where the hell my cliff is so I don't throw myself off it and traumatize myself.
Yeah.
Or if I do, I need to know how to do those repairs in my own system as
Yes.
well, not just trying to rely on the world around me to
Mhm.
do that for me.
Yeah, and that I love that you say that, because like that's the whole point of today's topic is why intellectualizing healing is keeping you from healing.
Hmm.
Is you're not doing everything that you just said
Yeah.
in the physical processing of it. It could be physical, mental, or whatever, but that is the detriment of intellectualizing your healing in the spiral that, or the circle that you can fall into, catch 22, that can happen, and why it's so important to do everything that you just said so that you don't stagnate your healing or stunt your healing.
Well, or keep unconsciously getting into
Yeah.
relationships that are very triggering for your
Mhm.
system
Yeah.
because there's something in you wanting to heal, and so it finds these things in other people that it's like, oh, this could help, I might be able to find that here.
Mhm.
When you keep going into those relationships, so like you could get lucky, you could
Yeah.
get lucky and find somebody who triggers that in your system, that has done enough of their own work that they can help guide you through those spaces.
Mhm.
Possible. I'm gonna tell you, probably also not very likely.
Yeah.
It is more likely that you noticing whatever, like your subconscious noticing whatever that pattern is in the other person, is going to compile on the narratives you've already built
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
perpetuate that cycle further. So that is where working with a coach, very specifically, or a
Mhm.
therapist, can be very helpful. Somebody to guide you through that space
Yeah.
who knows how to interplay with those dynamics from this, it's a healthy model,
Yes. Yeah.
right? That creates integration.
And as I'm going to touch, branch out on that before we end things for
Yeah.
today. Um, Not just like having a healthy model, but also like there's a difference. But like you go to a rage room. Let's say we'll use rage room as like coach versus not coach. Um, you can go to a rage room just like you could do most of the things that you could do with a coach by yourself,
Hmm.
but it won't get you to the same end game.
Yeah.
Uh, you can go to the rage room and get all of your rage out and feel so much better, but then still leave not knowing where that rage was coming from.
Yeah.
And that is the point of a coach. Yes, you could do a lot of, you could meditate, you could journal, you can do all of those things by yourself, but having a non-biased individual with training to help you pinpoint certain things and root out the problems,
Hmm.
or quote unquote problems, causes is a better word than problems. Root out the causes. Um, that is the importance of a coach. It's not just a random person that's like helping you through it, or is a guide
Yeah.
through the muck.
Well, and yeah, I think that's the important difference. So
Yeah.
when I look at being a coach, like my job isn't to tell anybody else what they should be experiencing, what they
Mhm.
should want in life, the like XYZ of how you get there, because that is different for everyone,
Mhm.
right? My job, my primary job is to get curious as fuck about your
Mhm.
experience. And
Exactly.
and then on top of that, to be like, to reflect like that this thing is really beautiful or normal or whatever it is, in that open and like non-judgmental way.
Mhm.
Like those are the top two things I see as my job, and then also like I bring this valuable tool set of these experiences you haven't had before, right?
Exactly.
And every coach is going to be different in the way they bring those about, because they have all the different aspects of facilitation and training they've gone through and felt called to. So, like, if you're feeling really drawn to a particular coach,
Hmm.
like, look into them, reach out to them, have a conversation with them if that's available,
Perfect.
right?
Yes, agreed.
Because like they may be this amazing mentor and guide
Hmm. I
for
also
that next
advise
leg.
trust in that like
Hmm.
calling. Don't think too much about it and just do it. Because the more you think about it, the more you're going to talk yourself out of it.
Yes.
So just act. Make the decision without making the decision. Trust your instincts. If you feel called to a specific coach, call them up immediately and send them the bill in full. Don't think too much about it because you'll second guess yourself, and you may end up becoming your worst enemy at that point
Yeah.
because we always talk ourselves out of the things that we need the most.
Yeah. And that's, again, if you're interested in working with myself or Rachelrose,
Mm-hmm.
under the um, information tab, you can find links for our content and how to contact us. Even if
Mm-hmm.
you just want resources, like I have
Yeah.
a whole page on my website dedicated to different books and resources. Um, I'm also happy to try to help facilitate, like if my coaching or Rachel's doesn't call to you, but you want a great coach,
Mm-hmm.
we have access to networks
Yeah. So
of
ask,
phenomenal
ask away.
coaches.
Yeah. Ask away the questions.
Yeah,
Most definitely.
beautiful. I love our talks and our calls, Rachel. Thank you so much.
Same. Same. I'm very glad that I was able to do this without headphones.
Yes. There was times I was hearing the music in the background. I was kind of like doing a little shimmy over here and enjoying
I
it. So I
apologize.
appreciate
I
it.
apologize
Oh
for.
no, I was enjoying the music.
Oh, good. Good. Well, definitely tune back in with us next Thursday at 1 o'clock PST. Predetermined topic for then as well.
Yeah, no. The topic, I'm gonna just call it right now,
I love it.
is
Yeah.
something that's been calling to me for a while, and it's
Hmm.
boundaries. The way I,
Ooh.
but we're gonna call this the big B because that is how it's come up for me for so long. So
Yeah.
yes, tune
I
back
love that.
in. Boundary topics are fascinating, and I'm
Hmm.
the way I end up defining those out as well is the cliff and the edge, and along with the idea of soft limits and hard limits, which tends to come from that realm of BDSM and kink. So those will all be incorporated into that space for sure.
Perfect. Yeah, I love that idea. Next week, Thursday, 1 p.m. PST, boundaries.
Yep,
Love it.
boundaries, the big B.
The big B. That's brilliant. I love it.
Yeah. All right. Have a great day, Rachel Rose, and to anyone else out there listening.
Yes. I'll see you guys next week.
Bye.
Bye.